Hello everyone, and welcome to the SOAP webinar. Today we have with us Jennifer Morse, a product evangelist from MadCap, and she is going to talk about topic-based authoring and single-source publishing using MadCap Flare. So welcome, Jennifer, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you having us here today. So again, my name is Jennifer Morse. I'm a product evangelist here at MadCap Software. Today we're going to take a high-level look at some of the features and benefits of authoring in a topic-based environment like MadCap Flare. So we're going to explore some of the advantages of topic-based authoring over traditional authoring. We're going to showcase some of the rich single-sourcing capabilities of Flare, and then last we're going to show a little bit about how our users are streamlining their content creation with much more responsive HTML5 web-based help systems, support portals. We're going to take a look at some print-based guides, everything that you can create right out of the box. Okay, so there are three core reasons why people consider using MadCap Flare. The first main reason is content reuse. Many folks have this issue of having the same procedure or piece of content or help topic perhaps in 15 different manuals. And writers are really tired of updating the same content across all of the different manuals when there's a change. So Flare addresses that. The next reason is what we call, or the next benefit Flare provides is what we call multi-channel publishing. So say you have 15 different manuals, and maybe it wasn't so much of a headache when they were all delivered as maybe one format. Maybe they were all delivered as a PDF file. But maybe now you have this need to have that content delivered as a manual that's searchable and navigable online, or maybe accessible on a mobile device, maybe a knowledge base. So that's the other problem that we solve. All of the content that you write in Flare can now be published to all of these different channels. And the last thing that we handle is ease of use. So in terms of that content reuse and the multi-channel publishing, the other thing that we solve in the industry is that we want to keep it easy to use so that content authors don't necessarily need to be programmers in order to achieve all of this reuse functionality. So those are the three core benefits that we bring to the table. So in terms of that content reuse bullet that I mentioned, I want to do just a quick comparison with something familiar, hopefully to most of you, which is Microsoft Word. So I'm going to use that as a point of compare here. The challenge with Microsoft Word is that the very things that make it so easy for us to use are the things that get in the way of content reuse. And that's because when we're working in Microsoft Word, we're actually doing three things at once. And it's not something that we probably think about because for most of us it's become second nature. But what we're doing is we're writing all of our content. We're also embedding all of the formatting of that content. And the last thing that we're doing is we're defining the overall scope of the document. And what do I mean by scope? Well, if I'm writing a training manual, it's always going to be a training manual. If I'm writing an installation guide, it's always going to be an installation guide. So essentially what that document is gets baked right in. So as a result, there isn't a great content reuse model. So the typical content reuse model in Microsoft Word, if that's what we're using, if you need to make a derivative of that master document that you created or a version of that original document, well, what you have to do is a save as. And now we've got some copies of that original document. So here in my example, we started with our original draft employee manual, but now, maybe your boss takes a look at that manual and they think, gosh, that's great. Now we need to create a version for the managers, and we also need to create a version of that manual for our hourly employees. So again, you do our save as. Now, a lot of the content may be very similar across these two different Word documents. There may be some subtle changes. And maybe with two versions of your source, that's not such a big deal. Maybe you can deal with that. What happens, though, oftentimes, is if you run into a situation where they say, oh, this is great. Now we need to make a different version for these different offices that we're opening. Different policy and procedure laws change for different countries and different cities. So now we have to do a save as again. And now we have 4 different versions of our source. And if there's change to any commonality between them. We have to go into all of our different documents and make those changes. And you get to a point where this can really start to spiral out of control. You almost have to keep some sort of a spreadsheet or mechanism to understand, okay, well, if I make a change here, where does that affect things downstream? And it starts to become a real giant headache. So we want to put sort of an X on this workflow. That's the old style workflow. And if we distill down to the root cause of what's going on here, as long as we're on the right side of this screen, what we're doing is we're hand touching and we're hand editing our deliverables, and that's what makes things very inefficient. So the whole idea of MadCap Flare, and really content management in general, is we want to stay on the left-hand side of this screen, and we only want to touch our source material, or that original draft that we created. So we want to get to a place where procedure X only exists in one place, even though it may end up living in 20 different outputs or 20 different deliverables. But when it comes time to making an update or an edit to procedure X, we only should have to update it in one place, and not all of the different manual content is going to live. So how in the world do we do this? Well, those three components that I spoke about in Microsoft Word that we're doing at once, we're writing our content, we're embedding our formatting, and we're defining the scope. In Flare, we break them apart into three separate components. So I'm going to start talking about that content authoring part, because there's some things that we do slightly different in a content management world. So when we're authoring in Word, we call that, and it's known in the industry as linear authoring, linear-based authoring. So we start at the very beginning of our document, and we keep writing until we get to the end. Flare doesn't work that way. We follow what's known as topic-based authoring. So we work on much more granular content, which we call topics. Now, sometimes when I show the next slide, folks panic a little bit and it looks a little bit dizzying, but please don't worry. What's important to know here is that we're not doing anything different in terms of authoring content than what we were doing in Word. If we take a look at that long policy and procedure manual that I was talking about earlier, let's say it has 6 chapters. Well, now we've got 6 granularity points already built into it. But let's just distill down to chapter 3. Well, maybe chapter 3 is made up of 2 procedures and 2 reference sections. So that's one more level of granularity. And that's really all we're doing. We're going to take those 2 procedures and those 2 reference sections that make up the entirety of chapter 3, and we're going to break them out as standalone files. And we call those files topics. So there's no real rule out there that says how long a topic needs to be, but it should have an identifiable purpose, and it should be able to stand on its own. So if I want to make a PDF procedure manual, for example, that just includes those 2 procedures and those 2 reference topics, which I've got highlighted here in this screen, I've got those 4 topics there circled. All I need to do is grab those topics and stick them together like little Legos, and now I have a new document. At the same time, maybe I want to create a searchable and navigable online knowledge base that just has procedures. Well, now I can grab just my procedure topics and link them together and publish them in an online output that may live on an intranet site or perhaps a public-facing site. So by modularizing our content like this, we're not adding any extra work. I mean, we still have to author this content. We're just adding more flexibility into how we can reuse this content in the future. So oftentimes, making this change from a linear writing environment to a topic-based writing environment is enough for a lot of our customers. But for some, we have to take it to the next level. Maybe that topic up there called About Users, well, maybe that can't be used for everybody that's going to use that particular page or that topic. Maybe it needs to be modified and customized slightly for a certain audience. So remember, in Word, what we would have to do is a save as, and now we would have to modify that copy for that new audience. And that puts us back into that hand touching and hand editing of our deliverables and gets us into that inefficient workflow, because now we're making copies of something that's living in multiple places. So in Flare, we take care of that with what's called single source publishing. So what is single source publishing? One of those fancy industry terms, but in plain English, really what it means is, if I have a version of my procedure for audience A, and a special version of my procedure for audience B, and an entirely different variation of that procedure for audience C, well, I'm not going to have 3 versions to maintain. I'm going to put all of my content into one procedure, and then I'm going to let my software do the heavy lifting. So why is this a good thing? Well, if we're approaching it this way, this greatly reduces the amount of content duplication. We can be much more efficient as authors because we can quickly customize a various topic, for example, for any audience we want. We can be much more consistent, and if translating or localizing this information is important to anybody, then this helps us reduce some of those localization costs tremendously, because this is information that only has to be translated one time. So what it ends up looking like, and this is a little bit of a simulation, I would have my procedure, my master document with all of my content. So let's take a look at this. So maybe this opening paragraph here, this very top one, maybe that's unique for audience A. So in Flare, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a special color code that says, hey, this content is special. This is only for audience A. It applies to those that are buying the enterprise version of my software. Maybe the second paragraph, maybe this is an alternate opening paragraph for an entirely different audience, so those that buy the standard version of my software. So it's going to get its own color code. Maybe the next 3 paragraphs, well, maybe those are common for everyone, so I'm going to leave those bits alone. And maybe this very last paragraph down here, well, maybe that's content that I only want to appear when I produce my PDF files. We don't want it to show up when we're viewing any of this information in a web browser or on a mobile phone. So if content is unique for any reason at all, you can use one of these color markers, which we call conditional tags. And there's other elements that we can do as well, which we'll take a look at when we look at Flare. Things like variables, which I've got up there on the screen, and snippets. So we'll take a look at that when we get into the demo. So if content's unique for whatever reason, we can use one of these color markers, again, which Flare calls conditional tags, to identify it. So these color markers are fantastic for the author, but we can't give it to our customer or an employee looking like this. So Flare is going to help us generate these custom deliverables. So in an XML workflow, these are called transforms. Again, another fancy term basically means take my XML content and make it into something that people can use and view. So there's things like XSLT for transforming things like into HTML5 sites. We've got XSLFO to generate PDFs. But really, a lot of writers don't care about all of that XML alphabet soup or what it all means. Writers just want it to work. They want it to work easily, and they want it to look good. So we simplified the terminology in Flare, and we call these transforms publishing targets. So a publishing target is simply a recipe that tells Flare how to process these XML files so that our deliverable is just what we want in the right format for a particular audience. So let's take a look at some of those. So I may create a target, for example. Here's my recipe file. This is for my enterprise customers. We want to include all of those tags that we've marked as enterprise. We're going to exclude all of those tags that are marked as standard in print, and we'll be able to define a few other attributes as well. I'll create another target here for my standard users. So again, we're going to include all of those tags that we've marked as standard. We're going to exclude any tag that we've marked as enterprise or print, and then we'll be able to define other attributes as well. So again, in my PDF, maybe for my printed manual, I'm going to include that print information and exclude all of the enterprise and standard bits that aren't necessary. So once we get this set up, again, we don't have to create a new version of that document and duplicate our source files. We simply create a brand new target or a new recipe. So once we have all of this in place, I can keep creating these targets, and these will simply produce derivatives of all of my master source files. And once I've got this set up, it becomes more like a publishing on demand type of system. So here's my output for my enterprise customers, which just includes the green information, all of those common bits that I left alone, and all of the other paragraphs are removed. Here's my output that's going to live in a standard web browser. Again, I'm including that standard information, removing that green enterprise content and that information that's only supposed to be in the PDF. But again, those common paragraphs are included. And in my PDF manual, the common paragraphs are included, but I'm excluding all of that information that's marked as enterprise or standard. So I want to point out too that this visual here with these color codes on our output, those aren't actually going to show up in real life. This is just there for a simulation. So that's kind of the big picture concept. In terms of a real world workflow, it's often made up of 3 steps. So the first thing we want to do is that we want to give the author the opportunity to leverage any existing content. And we have a number of importers for existing content. I would say the biggies are going to be the ability to import Microsoft Word files. So if you've got a library of Word files that you want to repurpose in Flare, you can do that. You can import FrameMaker files. We can bring in author it projects. We've developed an importer for author it. Any loose HTML files can come into Flare as topics. And then doc-to-help projects can come in. If you've only got the compiled .chm file on your hands, you don't have the source files, those can come into Flare. We can bring in data maps, RoboHelp projects, and then some others as well. So once we get an opportunity to import anything we want to reuse, we can then create new topics and edit them from within the Flare interface. And we can start adding some of those single sourcing techniques that I talked about, like adding conditionals, using variables, which we'll show. And then when it comes time to publish, we've got a number of options. So you can produce the print-based outputs like PDF, Microsoft Word. You can go back out to FrameMaker if you need. Our web browser outputs, so we've got a responsive HTML5 output. If you need to support browsers, older browsers for whatever reason that don't support that newer HTML5 technology, we have an older web help output, and then various others. You know, the .chm file is still supported if you're doing any kind of Windows application development. You need to ship a help file along with it that's going to live local to your customer's machine. That .chm file is still an option. Okay, so that's kind of the workflow. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and I'm actually going to go through and I'm going to bring up Flare, and we're going to talk through some of these things. Okay, so hopefully you all can see this. I'm sure I'll be notified if you can't. All right, so what we're looking at here is MadCap Flare 12. When you first launch the software, this is what you see. So a little bit of an orientation of what's happening here. For new users, I always recommend that new users get familiar with this starting page because there's a lot of good resources here. When we first open Flare, we have access to the Getting Started guide. So if you prefer to read through sort of some getting started topics to help you get familiar with Flare, this is a great resource. We do have a video, so if you're more of a visual person and you prefer to watch it, you can. We've also got a Getting Started tutorial, which is more of a walkthrough or a real-life project that's kind of unfinished, and it walks you through various steps in actually building something. So that's another great resource. We also have access to more help resources, so full access to the online help system for Flare, which is fantastic. Access to PDF files. We have videos and tutorials accessible here, plus the online community. We have a very active and helpful community of users all over the world, and it's a great place to get connected with those folks. And the last thing I want to draw your attention to is this template section. So project templates in Flare are just a starting point. They're there with some sample content, some sample styles, some skins already built. They're really there just to kind of get you going, just as jumping off points. And you can use them to customize your content even further. They're a great thing to look at and play with if you're a new user because it gets you kind of familiar with some of the gearing that's going on. So that's what I'm actually doing here. I'm starting with one of these templates for our demo here. I'm starting with this one called Top Navigation PDF and Advanced. So I've actually got it loaded here. And I want to draw your attention over to the left-hand side of the screen where I want to talk about these panes on the left. So the Content Explorer, this is where we're going to be storing all of our content. All of those little Lego bricks on our topics that I mentioned are going to be stored here. The other thing we're going to keep in our Content Explorer are any resource files, so files that support those topics, things like images, videos, style sheets, and we'll be taking a look at some of those things. The other important pane that you're going to be working in Flare is called the Project Organizer. So these are files that control more of the project as a whole. So that recipe file that I mentioned, you know, the target files are stored here, our tables of contents are stored here. So we're going to come back to that at the very end, but I just wanted to make you aware of that. So let's pop back over to that Content Explorer. If we want to start writing or editing a topic, it's very easy to do. We'll just come over here and double click on a topic here, and it's going to open up in our XML editor. So we call it an XML editor, but the good news is you don't have to know any XML to use it. You shouldn't even have to know how to spell it. We try to make it easy and very Microsoft Word-ish for authoring. We do give you access to the code behind the scenes, and we'll show you that in just a minute, but we want to make it really easy to use out of the box. So if I wanted to start typing content here, I can. So let's see if I can type while I have everybody watching me. Here's my new content, and maybe we'll make another ordered list. So here's step 1. So just like in Microsoft Word, I can type away. Perhaps I want to make this an actual ordered list. I can come up here and highlight it. I can come up here and choose numbered list, and now I've got my numbered list. I can insert images and video if I want. There's a number of ways to do it. An easy way is to come up to this insert menu here, and I can choose image. And when I do that, Flare's going to pull up a dialog. I can choose an image that's already in my project, or I can browse out to some location and grab it. So I'll go ahead and do that here. So let's grab a couple. So we'll grab a dog, and it's going to copy into my project here. I can resize this down if I want to. We'll do another one here, and we'll grab another image, and why not? And when we do that, Flare's going to actually give us a little dialog that says, hey, do you want to make a copy of that? I went a little bit fast, but that image that popped up where I said okay is, okay, we're grabbing this image from somewhere else. We're going to go ahead and make a copy of that so that you have access to it easily from within the project. I can also insert multimedia, so if you're including any kind of videos or tutorials along with the written word, we can easily insert them. So we support many different types of multimedia files. If you've got a Flash movie, you can put in a Windows Media Player, QuickTime Movie. Mimic is our own tool that creates software simulations and tutorials. So if we're using that to produce any kind of show me movies, you can insert those. HTML5 movies. We can also embed tutorials or any kind of movies that are out there on the internet, like on YouTube or Vimeo. So I'll go ahead and do that. I've got one selected here. So if you want to embed something that's already out there, we can. Shrink this down if we choose. So a few different ways to work with multimedia. So those are some of the features that hopefully will feel a little bit familiar like Microsoft Word. But there are some features that give us a little bit more power, that make it easy for us to achieve that single sourcing workflow and ensure that we're using and reusing as much content as we can. So as authors, we have that option to use things like variables and those color-coded conditional markers that I mentioned earlier. So let's take a look at some of that. So let me scroll up here. Let's talk about variables a little bit. So if we take a look at this first line here, we see here are the basic steps for using FictionSoft, and we've got some blue brackets around here. And if we hover over it, Flare gives us a little bit of information. This actually tells us that it's a variable. What is a variable? Well, in Flare, we can use variables for short strings of information that we need to use in our project over and over again. Using variables as a placeholder for text gives us a single place to define what that text needs to be. And we can define that variable text project-wide. So every time we insert this variable here, it's going to say FictionSoft. Or when it comes time to generate our outputs in that recipe file, we can override the definition of that variable and have it say something else, just for a specific audience. So variables are great for things like product names, version numbers, company names, essentially any short string of text that may change in the future. We have a lot of customers that are using this if they're doing documentation for OEM partners and they need to rebrand various text strings for their different customers. So variables are really, really powerful. So if I need to make a change to this for whatever reason, I can't actually edit this. Flare wants me to actually edit it in that variable set. So I can right-click and I have access to it. I can open up the variable set in my project and I can define it. So here it is. So maybe we decide, for example, we've been calling this thing FictionSoft, but at the last minute, maybe your marketing team makes a change and says, hey, we're not calling it FictionSoft anymore, we're calling it FictionSoft Pro. So rather than go into the 10,000 places where you've hand-coded FictionSoft to make a change, we can just define our variable to say FictionSoft Pro here. And maybe for the company name change as well. You know, we're doing something for a particularly different audience, so we're going to rename the company name as well. So maybe we'll call it SOAP. And when I click Save and we come back to our topic, we'll see some changes. So here's that definition change here, FictionSoft Pro. And if we scroll down, yeah, oh, we only had the one variable there. Okay, so, and we'll take a look at how we can change these things on a target-by-target basis. All right, so variables are great for those short strings of text that may change in the future when you're not sure what they're going to be. What if we have an entire chunk of information that needs to be used over and over again? Maybe you've got a series of steps or styled admonitions like cautions and warning notes that you use often. For that kind of content, we can use what we call a snippet. And a snippet is a chunk of content that we can use in our project over and over. So snippets can be styled, they can contain images, they can contain tables. Really anything that you would include in a topic could be contained in a snippet. So they're kind of like subtopics is how I like to think of them. And the major benefit of using a snippet is that we insert them into our topics by reference. So let's create one here. I'll open up another topic in our editor. And maybe this information here, these 3 bullet points, maybe this is information that I'm going to be using over and over again. If it's already written, I can highlight my text, and if I come back up to the home menu, I've got an option to create a snippet out of this. So when we do click that button, Flare's actually going to prompt us. We got to name it something, so maybe we'll call it Getting Started Steps. And by default, it's going to put it into this resources folder here so that we have easy access to it. So it's going to put it here in resources and store it here in this little folder called snippets. But we can put it anywhere we want. But I'm just going to keep it there to make it easy. So now I've made this text a reusable chunk of information. If I click here, I can't actually edit it because it's inserted now into this topic by reference. So if I need to change it or modify it in any reason or restyle it, I need to change it in the place where it's stored. So I'll come over here. Well, first, before we change anything, let's go ahead and use it. So maybe in my basic steps here, maybe this is the information that needs to be my snippet. So I'll delete this here and I'll insert it. Now there's a bunch of different ways we can insert a snippet. I can click and I can just drag it over to the area that I want. I can right click and from the context menu there's an insert snippet dialog. From within the XML editor I can come up here and I can insert a snippet, and this actually shows us ones that have been recently used. If there's a larger library of snippets, if there's ones that you use over and over, you can pin them and they'll show up here in your pin snippets. So lots of different ways to include it. So I'm just going to go ahead and click and drag it over and make it easy. So here's that chunk of information. Flare does give us a little bit of an indication here that there's something going on, but this line won't actually show up in our output. But again, I can't edit this text. If we need to change this for whatever reason, we can open up our snippet file, and maybe this last bullet point needs to be removed in all the places where I've used this chunk of information because we don't need it anymore. When I delete it and save and I come back to my topics that are using it, everything will be updated. So you can see this is a great way to make sure you're being consistent with those chunks of information that you use over and over again, and it makes it really easy to update all that stuff. Okay, so once we get comfortable in our editor, and we've used it for a little bit, there are some features that we can expose that help us understand a little bit more about document structure. And some of you may be more comfortable with this than others. So one of the things that we can do is we can turn on what we call our XML structure bars. And they're accessible down here in the editor. I have them turned off. So I'm going to turn them on, and you'll notice these bars that show up on the left-hand side. And this is actually patented technology that we developed. So it's something that we're very proud of. And these bars provide an easy way to give us a visual representation of the underlying XML structure without contaminating our editing environment with a bunch of XML tags, because that's the problem with a lot of XML editors out there. We wanted to keep it easy to use. So this removes some of the distraction of inserting a bunch of unnecessary tags in our markup. Now, there are some people who like to work in that mode, and that's fine. You can easily do that. I can turn on my tag mode if I prefer to work that way, but to me this looks a little bit more comfortable and familiar, so these structure bars are actually quite nice. So they're not just for show. I mean, we can see here that we've got a lot of information. We can see this basic steps. This is an H1. We can see a paragraph tag. If I hover over it here, here's that snippet that I inserted. I've got an ordered list with a bunch of list items. I got an image. So it tells us a little bit about the structure under the hood. But I can actually do things with these structure bars. For example, maybe this list item needs to be reordered. I can click on this list item here and drag it, and Flare is actually going to show me where it's legal and valid in an XML world to actually drop this thing. So if step number 3 needs to be step number 2, when I let go, my content moved and my list reordered. So I'm not spending a lot of time. If you've ever done this in Microsoft Word, it can be tricky. Maybe you copy everything you need and you do a cut. Maybe you missed a little something, and now you're spending a lot of time fixing your style sheet and all of those word numbering issues that tend to come up. We're moving things at a structural level here, so we won't mess any of that numbering up, which is nice. We can also do things like apply those conditional markers from these structure bars. Maybe this item here needs to be conditionalized for whatever reason. When I right-click, I have access to those conditional tags. Now, out of the box, Flare gives us some, but you can add additional conditional markers and color code them any way you want. I'm just going to use the 2 that I've been given. So maybe this particular information needs to be removed for a particular situation. So I'm going to click OK. Now I've got this red color code here. This tells me, hey, this information is specific. I'm going to be removing it for some reason. So we can apply conditions to an entire block item. We can apply conditions to an image if we want. So maybe I want to come down here and remove this image for whatever reason. So I'll go ahead and remove this for this particular deliverable. We can even conditionalize down to the character level, or perhaps remove a word. So maybe I need to remove the word basics for some reason. So we'll apply another conditional code here. So we've applied some content now. What's one nice thing about Flare too is we don't have to compile the entire project in order to see some of our changes. I can actually preview this topic to see how some of these changes are going to look. So if I go ahead and click this preview button, this is going to actually pull up my online content, and we can actually compare here. So if we look, my online output, my online target has those conditional tags set where we want to remove anything we've put in there as PDF. So any PDF content that I've tagged, that red conditional tag is going to be removed from my online content. So we can see the word basics is removed. We can see that my image is gone. And we also notice that step number 2 is removed. And the other nice thing is when we remove, when we're applying things structurally like this, even though we remove step number 2, my numbering didn't get messed up. The numbering here self-heals. So Flare is smart enough to make sure that my order is maintained for my list items if we apply conditional tags to them. And here's that YouTube video, so we can play it if we want. And that's kind of loud. All right, so let's go ahead and close that guy. So preview is really handy to kind of spot check your work. So I've been working in the web layout mode for some time here, but there's also another mode we can work in. So we call this, a lot of people call this a WYSIWYG editor. Around here, I've heard the term WYSI-op, which is what you see is one possibility. Because here we're looking at things in a web layout mode in terms of how our content will look in a browser. But we also can switch this to what we call a print layout mode. And if I come up here, I can invoke that. And things are going to change a little bit. Our visual view changes. So this looks a little bit more Microsoft Wordish. It feels a little bit more linear. And this can be handy sometimes. A lot of authors prefer to work in this environment. We can still manipulate and author our content here. We can still add things. Structure bars are still right here close at hand. But this lets us see our topic and how it may flow in a print-based world. So what is our page break behavior? How does it look with the margins that we've got set within our print page templates? How does it look in relation to some of the header and footer frames that we're building for our page templates? So it's just a slightly different way to look at our information. You'll notice here in my H1 that the content is a different color. So when we were looking at it in the web layout, it was black. Here in our print layout, it's green, which is a segue into the next thing I want to talk about, which is how formatting is controlled in Flare. So Flare uses cascading style sheets to control all of the formatting of our content. So this template project has some style sheets with style properties already defined, like heading sizes and color. We've got some fancy bullet styles. But again, they're just template projects and template style sheets, so we can change them. So let's do some changes here. So maybe we decide for whatever reason we need to make some changes to our heading 1. I can come here and I can highlight my text and I can come up to the local formatting toolbar and change it to red. And hopefully some of you are cringing at this point because that's not best practice. If we do that approach, then we have to go into all of the topics that are using this H1 and manually make those changes. And then if there's some sort of direction that comes down that says, okay, at the 11th hour we need to change our colors because our corporate style guides changed, now I have to manually go through and change again in every single topic and manually change it to the color that we're supposed to use. So that can take a lot of time. Best to use a style sheet for these kinds of things. So if I want to make a change, I can right click and I can edit my styles. And this is actually going to bring up what's called our simplified style sheet editor. And this is showing all of our styles. But we're dealing with just a heading right now. So I can actually toggle and just filter down to the heading styles that I want to use. So here's that H1. And if I double click on it, I can access a lot of properties about this H1. I can choose what the font actually is. I can set some background colors, some borders. There's a lot of things I can adjust about this H1, but I'm going to keep it simple. I'm just going to choose the color here. So let's go ahead and make this a different color. We'll go ahead and make it purple so that it stands out. And when I click save and I come back to my topic, we'll see that it's updated. So imagine this change taking place in 10,000 topics. That saves a lot of time, and it's way easier to manage it here than to manually go through and change things. So that's the simplified view. We also have what's called an advanced view, and it's a bit of a misnomer because you don't have to know how to code anything in your style sheet editor, even though it's called advanced. So I'm going to switch to it here. It's just a different way of looking at our style properties. And one of the things I love about this view is that we can easily show the different style sheet mediums that we have in play, and we can show them in a synchronized fashion. And this is actually a new feature in Flare version 12. So let me go ahead and load it here, and we'll talk a little bit about style sheet mediums. So now I've brought up, in my same view, I've got my default style sheet and the style sheet that's going to show up for my print outputs. So what's a medium? A medium is just an alternate group of settings in a particular style sheet. So for example, you've got your online medium, which has a certain font color specified or a style. And then maybe in your print-based outputs, you want H1s to take on an entirely different look and feel. Well, you can have a default medium and a print-based medium and adjust the styles accordingly. And what's nice about this is we can actually see them side by side and everything's in sync. So let's make some changes. So we've made this purple. Maybe we decide, for our print-based outputs, we don't want it to be green, because when folks actually print out these pages, we don't want to use a bunch of ink. So let's go ahead and change it back to black. And we'll click save, and then we're going to come back to this in a little bit. The other thing that we can do is we have support, and this is really important if you are writing for a responsive audience or if responsive content is important to you. Flare has support for media queries, and we make it really easy to manage them. So a media query, just like a print medium here, it's just an alternate group of settings in a style sheet. And these settings are automatically used under certain conditions, like when our screen size is reduced. Maybe when we're looking at stuff on a mobile device, it's much narrower, so we want some different stylistic properties to kick in. And when those criteria are met, namely that narrower screen size, these different style settings that we've applied will display. So let's add another one. Now Flare bakes in some media queries for you already that most people can use. You can certainly add additional ones if you want, but let's load the mobile one. So maybe we want the font for our mobile device when we're actually viewing it on mobile device to be slightly different. So maybe we'll make it green. And then we'll come back to that. Okay, so I want to switch gears just slightly. We've been editing a lot of information here in the Flare editor. What if we've got a lot of existing content that we want to repurpose? We touched a little bit about this on the slides. So maybe we've got a library of Word documents that we want to bring in. So we can bring those into an existing project if we want. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. I'm going to switch gears. I'm going to come up to this project tab, and I'm going to tell Flare I want to import a collection of Word documents. So what will happen now is when we invoke this, we're going to get our import Microsoft Word wizard. So this is going to tell us, okay, we want to bring these Word documents into this existing project. And when I click next, now we can tell Flare, okay, well, what files do we want to actually bring in? So we'll go ahead and add them here. And I think I've got some Word files in here. So let's grab a few. So I'm going to grab these guys. and we'll select them. So you can bring in multiple Word documents at once if you want. I know a little bit about these Word documents. I know that a number of them, or 3 of them, came from a particular department that uses a very basic Word template. So they're using heading 1 styles and heading 2 styles, and they've made it look a certain way. One of those Word docs has come from an entirely different department, and they've customized their heading styles and what they've called them in Word. So we can accommodate that as well. When we click Next, Flare is going to do a deep scan of these Word documents. It's going to look and extract as much information as it can. We want lists to stay lists. We want our tables to stay tables. And we come to this new screen, which is our first real decision point. In the beginning, we talked about that linear-based environment with Word. Well, Flare is topic-based. So this is the screen that lets us take those long linear Word documents and break them up into individual topics. And the way Flare does that is by using our heading styles in Microsoft Word. So this is where Flare tells Word, okay, every time you come to a heading 1 or a heading 2, break and create a new topic for me. So heading 1's a great place to start. That's often the beginning of a new thought. So we'll choose heading 1 and click Finish. And Flare's going to give us a little bit of a preview of what we're going to get out of this import. So here's one of the topics. So it came to a heading 1 and it broke and created a topic for me. And I can preview it here. If I scroll down, however, I notice that, you know what, this is really long. This doesn't look very much like a topic. It looks a little bit more like a chapter. So what's nice is when we do this import, if we don't like what we see, we can always hit cancel and come back and maybe give it a little bit more granularity. So we'll break on heading 1, but maybe we need to give it a little bit more. We need to break on heading 2 as well. And if you notice here, we've got heading with no space and then 1 and heading no space 2. Those are the styles that came from that other Word document. So we want to break on those headings as well and repurpose that information. So we'll choose those headings. And when we click Finish, we get a little bit more. You can see we've created a little bit more by way of topics. And if we preview it here, this looks a little bit better. This looks like something that has an identifiable purpose. It looks like it can stand on its own. And we can kind of see that, you know, that's the case for all of these files. So I like what I see. I'm going to go ahead and click Accept. And when we do that, Flare actually creates a folder for us and puts our import in there. So here it is. It's called About Firewalls. And all of those topics that we created out of those 4 Word documents are stored here. One thing that new users notice when they do this, they look at this and they say, well, okay, this is great. All of this is stored alphabetically. This is not the order that I'd want to show my customers. Flare stores all of our files here in our Content Explorer alphabetically, or alphanumerically actually, just for organizational purposes. We can arrange these things and put them in different folders and create new folders for more organization, but they're always going to be stored alphabetically, simply for organizational purpose and findability. The topics that we deliver in our output and their order is going to be maintained in our project organizer in our TOC file. Our TOC is our table of contents, and it plays a really important role. So let's switch gears here and talk about this. This controls the order and what topics are actually displayed in our output. And it's what lets us stitch together whatever topics we want for a given deliverable. So we'll open up one here and take a look at what that looks like. So this is the table of contents I'm going to use called Online Output. So we'll use this for our online deliverable. So these are the books and the topics that have been created. Now I can move these things around because this is, again, what we can organize differently for our audience. So if any one of these needs to be in a different position, I can click, I can drag it. I can also use these little bars up here in the TOC editor to move them around. So in any direction I want. If I want to grab any additional Lego bricks and add to this table of contents, I can. So let's go ahead and click About Firewalls here. Maybe he needs to go right here. So any of our little Lego bricks can be selected and added to a particular table of contents. Okay, so let's tie some of these concepts together. We've got content in our project. We've added existing content in our project. We've built a little bit of organization. Now let's actually build something. And this is where our target, or that recipe file that I mentioned in the very beginning, comes into play. And those targets are stored back in our project organizer in their own little folder. So let's open up one and talk about it. So here's one of those recipe files. And we'll open it up here. So a lot of settings in this target file, and many you may not even have to look at or touch, but I just want to talk about a few settings that are fairly important. So the first thing is, what are we actually making? This target file is going to be an HTML5 site, but this is where we would tell Flare, well, if we want to produce something else, we can choose any of our outputs from here. this is that order of topics or what table of contents we're going to use. So again, you may have more than one table of contents here per project because the different outputs you use may have a different order of things. So this is where we tell the target which order of topics we're going to use. Conditional text. This is where we tell the target or the recipe which tags do we want to include or exclude to make this information unique. So in this particular target, I've marked all of my online content that I'm going to exclude, and I'm going to exclude any of those special tags that I've marked for PDF only because I'm producing an online output. Our variables we may need to override, so maybe, for example, just for this particular one, we're not going to call it FictionSoft Pro. Maybe this is for our enterprise customers, so we'll call it FictionSoft Enterprise. And we'll do a save. A few other things here that I don't really have a lot of time to go into, but a lot of other options. So let's go ahead and click Build and make something. So I'm going to click Build. Now, when we're actually processing these files and compiling everything, what we've done is we've moved this process to the background. So we can continue to come in here and build additional targets. We can write and we can edit information. Maybe we want to build this PDF file as well. So I'll go ahead and click Build Him because we want to take a look at some print-based outputs too. So this one's done. Let's take a look at what's going on here. All right, so let me open this up, and this is where I think hopefully my browser doesn't change. Oh, I'm going to pull it over to the other screen. And I hope you all can see this. Please let me know if you cannot. So this is that output that we built. Couple things going on. You'll notice that our variable change here took effect because we said, okay, for this particular output, we want to call it FictionSoft Enterprise. Here's that online table of contents that we created. There's that extra topic that we added. And I can come in here and I can navigate around. Now, this particular output is called our top navigation output. Why? Because we moved that traditional side navigation pane that oftentimes lives on the left-hand side that you see up to the top, and we just moved this navigation up here. We also wanted to make search much more prominent. We all live in a Google world, and we're all very used to doing that thing when you want to find something, which is you go to Google and you do a search. So we wanted to make it easy to have search much more prominent. I do want to also point out that this skin or the wrapper, like this placeholder for the logo, this background image, you know, how this search bar looks, all of this is customizable. This wrapper around all of our content is called a skin, and you can change pretty much anything you want about how this looks. We've, again, because it's a template project, we've put some things in place as placeholder information, but you can edit it and change it as you wish. So if I want to come in here, maybe I want to search on the word topic, for example. So if I do a search, I'll get something that looks somewhat familiar. It's very Google-esque. I've got my topic title, I've got a little bit of a description, and I've got the direct URL to the actual topic. You'll also notice up here that I've got this definition. This experience is very similar to when we do a Google search on a particular word. Sometimes you'll see the definition of that word pop up to the very top of the results. In Flare, if we choose to create a glossary of terms and we include that glossary of terms in our output, when we do a search on that term, it's going to show up here at the very top. So that's how we achieve that effect. This is also responsive. So if we shrink this browser size down a little bit, let's go ahead and load a topic, and I can navigate through anything here. Here's that H1 effect that we talked about, and you'll notice that my image that I had removed is gone. So is my step number. That middle step was removed. But if I shrink my browser size down, we'll see things change a little bit here. So my navigation went away. So this is kind of like a tablet size. My top navigation went away. I've got this nice little hamburger menu that shows up so I can still navigate through. But if we shrink it down even further, we can see some of those stylistic changes took effect. Remember, we told Flare when we are in a much narrower screen size, we want our font to be slightly different for our H1. So because it detected that smaller screen size, those stylistic properties that we set for our mobile media query kicked in. So that's the top nav output. We can also produce that traditional tri-pane look as well. I happen to have one open here just to save some time. So this is a help file for one of our older versions of Flare. So we call this our HTML5 tri-pane. You've got that traditional table of contents on the left that expands and collapses. We can still search for things just like we would in the top nav. Also responsive, if we shrink it down a little bit, we see our menu goes away and we still have access to our table of contents here. So a little bit different look and feel, but again, that skin is completely customizable. So let's pop back into Flare here, and let's take a look at that PDF file too. And he opened up in my other screen. So if I drag him over, and let's make this viewable so we have a single page, perhaps that'll be better. And we'll make this a little larger. So when we build our PDF, the page templates that we created get pulled in. So I've got a title page here. I was using a variable for the company name, so you see it picked up the variable SOAP, which we added for the company name variable. We can see we've got a custom copyright page because that's what my template file has. My table of contents file was dynamically generated, so I can click on any of these and it'll jump me to that particular topic. So again, the page templates that we create for our PDFs are also very customizable. Here we've just got some odd and even or some different pagination for the bottoms of each page. One thing I want to point out, let's go ahead and look at this here. I didn't show this, but I just want to point out something that's really kind of interesting when we're linking to things. Flare has full support for what we call cross-references, and cross-references are kind of like hyperlinks on steroids. So here we've got a regular hyperlink, which is going to jump us to someplace outside. But cross-references are great when we're jumping our users around to different topics in the help system. So here's an example of that. You could use a regular hyperlink and just, for more information, click here and jump your user to some other topic in the help system. But if that information is actually going to be going to print, where the user is going to have to print that page out, or you have to send something off to actually be professionally printed and bound, a blue underlined term doesn't do anybody any good. So cross-references are much better when you're writing in a hybrid environment. So maybe the content that you're writing is going to be viewed online, but also be used for print. Use a cross-reference instead when we're jumping people around from within the project. That's because those links can be resolved to proper page cross-references in our print-based output. So this was automatically resolved to see images on page 21. So if it's a live link, I can click there. But if we were actually viewing this on a page, if we were holding it in our hand, it would direct us to the right place. And if we looked at that same link in an online topic, let's see if I can find it here. We'll go back. And if we go to that actual one, so here we can see it looks a little bit different. It's acting like a regular hyperlink when we're viewing it online. But again, when we go to print, it's going to resolve itself to a proper page cross-reference. So another good trick to use. All right, so lots of information here. That's some of the out-of-the-box things that you can produce right out of Flare. I also want to bring up a couple of existing examples that our customers have done. On our website, we've got a showcase page here, which has a lot of externally facing links to examples in terms of what our customers have done right out of the box. So before we wrap, I just want to show this this page here. It's a great place to come and peruse just to get some ideas about what you can do. I've pulled up a couple here. We talked about that HTML5 tri-pane. Here's a company that customized their own skin using the skin editor in Flare to use their own colors and logos and buttons. Again, nothing needed to be coded here. They've just made some adjustments using the skin editor to do that change. So, a customized open and closed node here for our table of contents. Another neat one is this one called XMatter. So they've taken the top navigation skin and customized it with their own colors and logos, so you can navigate around here. So they've done a really nice job of styling it the way they'd like. Another interesting one, I wanted to bring up this PDF file because Flare content can really scale. So this company produced a custom PDF with their own page template. So they've got a custom header and footer that they created in Flare. But you'll notice here that it's almost 2,500 pages long. So Flare can handle short guides. It can handle really long guides. It really scales nicely. So I'd encourage you, if you're interested, to come up to the showcase page and kind of check out some fun examples of what other folks are doing. Kind of a nifty way to present different information. And that pretty much wraps it up. I think we've got a few minutes left. Maybe what I'll do is I'll switch over here to see if there's any questions. Looks like I have a little bit of a delay in my Google Hangouts. Maybe, Peter, if you're there, if there are any questions that we can help with.
Yes. Thank you, Jennifer, for this awesome presentation. So now I think it's a good time, good 5 minutes for some questions. So guys, On the right side of our transmission, there is an option to ask a question in this live chat. So if you have some questions, now is the time to ask them. Or if you are too shy, you can just write to us and we will make sure to pass them on to Jennifer.
Yes, please. I know I went through a lot of information here, so if there's any questions that, again, like if you're too shy to ask, I'm happy to help. Maybe what I could do is I'm going to share my screen again, and I'll put my email address up there. And oh boy. So let me pull up a topic, and I'll just type my email address in here so anybody can go ahead and, not the most elegant way to do it, but I'll throw it up here anyway. Oh, and I'll even put my direct number. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions at all about what I talked about, or any questions about how you may be able to use single sourcing or topic-based authoring or just Flare in general. We'd be happy to help.
Okay, I don't see any questions on the live chat, but if we get anything afterwards, we'll make sure to pass it on to you.
Wonderful.
Answer afterwards.
Looking forward to it. Thank you. Great. Well, thanks everybody for joining me today. I really hope this was helpful and useful, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to present again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you everyone for listening, and see you on the next webinar.
Wonderful. Thank you. Bye-bye.